Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Brian. Any of you viewers that have watched my channel for a while may have remembered a video about a Dune Buggy rehab. I think there might have been 2 episodes. I'll link them somewhere if I remember how to do that. Anyway, that was over a year ago, and since then I've been putting off working on it some more, but it's been bringing the property value down too much sitting around in the front of our house, so I need to get back on it, and it's pretty much too cold to do anything else. So here goes. So the seats in this Dune Buggy were just held in with sheet metal screws through the floor into the base of the seat, so obviously weren't adjustable. I'm guessing it's had several lives, different colors, different equipment installed, etc. Probably had different seats originally that used those kind of sketchy supports. So the seats that were on it were adjustable, and where I got them out, I realized, well, the seats that were in there have an adjustable backrest, but no adjustable base. Once I got them out, I measured the holes and did some searching. Apparently that's kind of a standard bolt pattern, and I found some, I think I got them on eBay, adjustable seat brackets that have a universal hole pattern that was able to fit that. So as these seats sit here and ooze water and ice, so I got one of them bolted up to this seat base, and it actually works, and there's a handle that will allow you to adjust the seat position. What I need to do now is figure out how I'm going to bolt this to the floor, because this is not flush with the floor, if that makes sense. So I need to raise them a little bit, but I can't raise them too much. So let me figure out what I need to do to just elevate this enough where this isn't resting on the floor, but not too high that your head's banging in the roll bar. So it's the next weekend. I got one of these seat brackets installed in the seat. So I had some pieces of a piece of 1 inch square tubing that I cut and drilled a hole in. That way we can use one bolt to bolt through the bottom seat track and then through the floor. I mean, that's my hope anyway. You can get it out far enough that you can actually, these are Allen head bolts, you can get a wrench in there to hold it. And then we'll put these through the floor of the Dune Buggy and just put big washers under there, and that should hold it. I'll get all these bolted on, and then we can set it in the car, or set it in the buggy, and mark where the holes need to be drilled. I've got everything marked where I think it's right. I marked it with a silver Sharpie around the stud, and hopefully there's not stuff in the way underneath. We'll just give it a shot. Those are 5/16 bolts, so I went up one size from there. Of course, that one ends up right in a frame tube. So I guess we'll just need a longer bolt for that one. The main reason for getting the seats in first is to figure out the pedals location. These were the pedals that were in it. A pretty much amalgamation disaster with the one line, which is a Ford Master, out of something crimped off that would go to the front normally. I don't know what this clutch master was, because somebody's retrofitted it with a hydraulic clutch. So we got a new set that actually has a single reservoir for the brake master and clutch, and it's actually all bolted correctly in, and there's the right throttle pedal. So I got the driver's seat in, and then I sat in it and test fit it, and that extra inch of rise crowds you pretty good on the steering wheel. So I was able to flip the brake bracket, not the brake bracket, I was able to flip over the seat adjuster, slider, handle, whatever you want to call it, and it actually has enough clearance where it works. So I'm going to bolt these directly to the floor, bypassing the blocks. I haven't fixed the other side yet. I mainly did that so I could set in the pedal assembly and figure out where I wanted them, or where it would be reasonable for different height drivers. I used existing holes. I guess that's kind of a universal bracket pattern. And I don't know, it looks way out of square. I don't know what they lined up the holes with. And maybe that's on purpose, I don't know. But I'm going to re-drill these holes and make this kind of square. Maybe they lined it up on the rail. Anyway, I'm going to get those drilled kind of where I feel like they look better and get that mounted, and then we can start on plumbing some brake lines and clutch lines. I have the pedals bolted in to my degree of satisfaction. At least they look square now. So I figured I'd go down the path of plumbing them. I bought this 25-foot roll of 3/16 copper nickel brake line on that Jungle place, or the A to Z place. It came with some fittings also. The fittings are US sizes. So it threads in to these masters. I don't know what thread size these are. If I had any information on them, I've long since lost it. But the US size is pretty loose in there. I did a little Googling, and the most common, well, one of the common brake size threads are 3/8/24, which is what this is, or M10x1. So this is going to be kind of a mixture of everything. The M10x1 threads in way tighter. So I believe these are metric sizes. The 3/8 or US size, the 3/8/24, it's pretty loosey-goosey in there. So I believe these are the metric sizes. And they'll both fit on the existing brake line. So that won't be a problem. I use my thread gauges out of my tap and die kit to identify those. The problem is, it's almost like they didn't tap these deep enough. At least this one's definitely not tapped deep enough. So the threads don't go all the way to the bottom of that hole. They're closer on this one. Anyway, so I don't have a tap that size, so I've ordered one, and the A to Z place says they'll get it here tomorrow. So I guess we'll come back when we have that. So I don't remember how much of this actually got filmed yesterday. The threads in here are M10x1 for a metric style brake line, which has a bubble flare on it instead of an inverted flare. More on that later. But the threads don't go deep enough to where the line, or they don't appear to go. I don't want to really force this, but they go even hand tight, and that's just, it's not a tapered thread, that's a straight thread. I probably could force it and make that seal, but over here on the clutch side, it's even shallower. So I got an M10x1 tap, and I was going to tap these deeper, these holes deeper into the bore. Don't really know any good way to do that without getting chips down in there, so I'm going to take some grease and fill up the flutes in my tap, and the hope would be that that will grab all the chips and pull them out with the tap. We'll still flush it out with some brake cleaner, etc. when we're done. Here goes. All right, I think we're bottomed out. So it looks like it did bring some chips with it. Let me clean that off, fill it back up with grease, and then we'll do the other one. So now that those are tapped and cleared out, the nut will thread all the way in on this side, which I guess would be the brake master cylinder, and it'll tighten up. So I can work with that now. On the clutch master cylinder side, it threads in and bottoms out before the line gets tight. So the nut's all the way bottomed out on the body of the master cylinder, and there's still play in it. So I went and searched at the local auto parts stores, mainly the green one and the blue and yellow one, and they didn't have any nuts that were any longer than this, which that may be as long as they get. So I thought, well, what's different here? You know, if we measure how deep the threads, or how deep this whole kind of cavity is in here, 590 thousandths on this side, and over here I'm like almost 700 thousandths. So when they machined this and threaded it, they drilled that too deep. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll work on the brake portion of it. I'll take this clutch master cylinder off, I'll take it to work, I'll set it up in the milling machine, and I'll mow off some of this surface. That way we can actually thread the nut in. So let's get started on the brakes. So the brake line kind of runs willy-nilly over all this stuff and goes to what I believe you would call a turning brake. Not even sure if this thing works, but we'll go ahead and plumb it up to that point at first. If it turns out that thing doesn't work and is a waste of time, can't fix it, whatever, and put a T in right here, or a T in this vicinity, and just eliminate it, and then the lines will still go out to the rear brakes. So we'll see if that thing will come off first. So amazingly, this actually broke free. Get this off here, and then we'll figure out what thread that is and work on making our line. So that's a 3/8/24 with a inverted flare on it, so like American style. So I'll have to do two different styles on each end. Let me find the tools for all that. So there's a 3/8/24 fitting on that turning brake. So we'll go ahead and put the flare on it. It's 3/16 brake line. I have this parts store quality flaring tool set, but it'll work fine. You're gonna go ahead and get your line in there and find the appropriate little die here that's stuck. Make sure that's the right size. It says 3/16. So if I remember right, use this little step here. You kind of set your height with it. Tighten this down. First step, we'll go ahead and, if you can even see any of this, the first step, we put this piece on, and that does the first portion of the flare. It's probably not a bad idea to lubricate it with a little brake fluid. Turn it until it bottoms out. Now you can get rid of that. Still have some brake fluid on there. And you go back with just the little pointy part of the press. And that should push the center of that flare kind of down into it. Make an inverted flare. It doesn't look too bad, and that should work. Yeah, it's a little bit squished, but it should seal. So we'll go thread that in to the turning brake and kind of work forward and figure out our line length. So that thread's in there. Now I can just kind of carefully form this line. The nice part about this style brake line is it's way easier to form than regular steel stuff. So I'll get that kind of formed and get up to the front, and then we'll do a bubble style flare on the other end that'll match the master cylinder. I have this line formed, I cut it, cleaned it out. I cut that mock-up brake line I had with the M10 nut off that brake line. This one will take a bubble flare, so I actually have a metric bubble flare tooling set. Kind of the same principle, although it's a little bit easier. Let's see if I remember how to use this. So it's all in metric, so we're going to go with 4.75 being this 3/16. This is kind of the same principle. Find the little die that fits. In this particular model, this little wrench has a cutout for you to set the depth. It's pretty good. So you can get the right size adapter, kind of pop it in there. Let me put some brake fluid on this. Actually, in this case, you thread this adapter all the way onto the forcing screw. And tighten it down on there. And then that should get tight where you can't turn it anymore. And then that should be a bubble flare. There we go, that's good and tight. I'll form this out of the way, come up with some clamps to secure it. And in theory, we should be able to add brake fluid to this and bleed it, and it should work. But I know there's at least one line on the back that's crushed that I'll need to replace. I think where we let off, that brake line was bottoming out before, the threads were bottoming out before the flare on the brake line was making contact and sealing. So took it to work and milled that off, so now that bottoms all the way out. And get this put back in, and then I'll work on running the clutch hydraulic line, get that out of the way. You may remember the clutch master that was in there, the port came out on this side of the car, so they had the tubing all stretched over. Of course, the pedals were back a lot further. There's a union in this line, and this line actually looks fairly new back to the clutch slave. But I mean, I could reuse that union. Technically, that's kind of legal, but since I have enough tubing, I'm going to go ahead and run a whole new piece all the way back to where the clutch slave cylinder is. Turns out that was a regular inverted flare, so I went ahead and flared my tubing and remember to put the nut on. the slave cylinder, I mean, likely should have a hose attached to it so it can move and not bend the tubing. But this stuff's fairly flexible. So what I think I'm going to do, and also the outlet comes out this side of the car and you go back in, I'm going to bend a 90 on here, and then I'm going to try to bend a coil into it and then come forward, so that'll add some flex to it. It'll make a little more sense when I'm done. So I got this fancy tubing bender here. I don't know, something kind of like that. Let me work on that a little more and we'll get it put in the Dune Buggy. The clutch tubing, the brake tubing are all run now. Well, they're run back to here, at least the brake tubing is. The clutch is hooked up. I think I'll go ahead and put some fluid in there and make sure it holds and see if we can bleed that. Sucking it in every stroke. Alright, so it's up to the slave cylinder and it's leaking there, so let me check that out. Apparently I hadn't tightened my fitting all the way, so now that seems secure. And if I pump it, it actually sort of tries to move. So let's see if this bleeder will come loose. So it turns out the bleeder is actually a little tiny thing on top. I couldn't see it. So that's clear now, and that did not break off. All right, that's getting pretty close. I think we'll let that sit, and maybe any residual air bubbles will work their way to the top. So it's been a few weeks. We're back on the Dune Buggy. Thought I had the clutch pretty much licked. What I discovered was after I bled it, it sort of worked, and then a day later I would go to pump it and the pedal would get really hard and it would barely move, and there was no air in it. So what I discovered was apparently it's leaking through. So there's a piston inside here, obviously, so when you put fluid in here, it pushes this piston down. Well, what's on the other side of this should just be airspace. There should not be any fluid on that side. So obviously there's fluid on that side, so what would happen is this filled up with fluid, this nut kind of sealed it, and it was fighting against, it would push here and fight against the fluid on this side. So obviously that thing looks to be sealed from the factory, and there's no name, nothing on it. So I did the old Google search and came up with, I went on, guess where? Anyway, this was about half the price of a new one. Because it said it has some cosmetic damage, and it's a wheel wood, I mean it's good stuff. It said there were some scratches on it. I don't know, it looks absolutely fine to me. See if we can get this thing put in. It says this end goes to the clutch fork, and it has a ball end which should ride in there, I hope. We'll see what we can do. I think this is going to be a little different than what you would find on like a muscle car or a standard one where you push on it, because we're pulling on this. So let me get into this and see if we can figure this out. And also, it has like a Heim joint at this end, where this one was just jammed through this cylinder. Pretty sure that's where the original clutch cable would have been. That probably didn't help with misalignment, etc. So that may have prematurely worn that out. So let's see if we can make this thing work. Got the existing one off there. That was pretty well cross-threaded. So what the difference is here is my fluid line is going to be in a different spot, but that's okay. I can bend another loop in there. At the bottom though, the rod on the other one went through this hoop, and they provided this Heim joint for some reason. So I think I'll pull this bracket off and see if we can make something straight that'll bolt this on and let it kind of travel in the correct direction and not be misaligned and perhaps not wear itself out as quickly. I had a piece of steel in my little scrap pile, had some extra holes in it, so I only had to really drill one hole and make it do what I wanted. I was able to manipulate the line. I was able to bend the line enough that it lined up and fit. So let's give it a few pumps and see how much we have to bleed it. So we'll use the little jingly stick here and try to do it one-man method. Open it, push, close it. So I believe it's all bled. I have it adjusted as short as I can pretty much get it, but it's a decent enough stroke. I believe I'm out of adjustment as far as how much I can shorten it up, because I still have free play in the clutch fork, so it's still pretty far away. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to modify my bracket and add another hole or add another piece to it to get it further away, effectively shortening up the whole length. Took the piece I'd actually cut off, moved it over with an existing slot, and I took the free play out of it. So now, yeah, some actual action. All right, guys, I think we'll end this video right here. We've got the clutch working, and next we'll tackle the brakes, and I have some new parts for that. So I promise it'll be less than a year before we get to the next video in this series. Thanks for watching, subscribing, and we'll see you soon.